So it's Sunday morning. We need to get the spring switched over on that strut over there, and we need to put it back into the fronts, and then we'll do the rears. So let's get to it. What's up, guys? This is part 2 and day 2 of the spring install on this Volkswagen Golf R. If you're with me in the last video, you know we're removing the New Speed race springs and installing the OEM Volkswagen Golf R spring. In that video, I showed you how to remove the front struts, and if you did watch that video, you know that some complications arose. I broke a ball joint, had to replace that, which ended up taking about 12 hours to get the fronts out. If you didn't see that, I'll link that up in the top right hand corner of the screen. But at the end of that video, I got the driver's side strut out, and that's what I'm working on right here. Because I went through a pretty detailed spring removal and installation in the last video, I'm just gonna fast forward through it here as you can see. And then in this video, I'll show you how to reinstall the front struts as well as remove and install the rear springs. I do want to make a quick note or a quick disclaimer that most of the hardware that you remove during this job needs to be replaced. I'm not replacing the hardware in this video. That will come in the next video. The reason being is I didn't have it at the time. Got it sent in from Deutsch Auto Parts. Keep an eye out for that video. I'll install the new hardware and then we will be good to go. So hope you enjoy the video and let's get into it. Okay, so we have the strut down here. I'm gonna put it back into the driver's side. First, I'm gonna hit the hub sleeve with PB Blaster as well as the bottom of the strut so we can get it to slide in a little bit easier. See that I do have the bottom of the rotor jacked up a little bit just to relieve some of the strain off of the drive shaft and the steering linkage. You will notice on this top hat there is arrows here. So there's 3 ways you can put this on your car. This arrow should be pointing front and back on the car. So I'm going to lower the jack slightly to give ourselves some room. You want to position this hub so it's facing up this way. Make sure that this little fin deck here is pointing back. So we've got it started. I'm gonna try to push it in a little bit more, and then we're gonna work on installing the control arm. I'm gonna start these top hat bolts up here just so that the strut will be hanging. I'm not gonna tighten them down so that the strut still has some wiggle room. All right, so at this point, we have all 3 of the top hat bolts in, not tight, so that the strut will hang on the strut tower. Now we're gonna go ahead and replace the lower control arm. So now that we've got the spindle into the hub a little bit, we're going to want to put the lower control arm back on, which I'll do right now. Alright, so I was able to get the control arm back in. The way I did it, I started with taking a mallet and kind of pounding this bushing into place roughly, then using this 18mm as kind of a guide, and I got it started and still loose, but it got it relatively in the right place. Then I used the rubber mallet to knock this piece around until I could get the 2/16s in. And then once these 3 are in and fairly tight, everything else lines up. So you just have to line up this bushing, put the 18mm through this way, and then I was able to line up the ball joint with the control arm, and now I can put 3 ball joint nuts back on. We got 60 Newton meters for these 3 ball joint bolts. The 18mm up here is 70 Newton meters plus an extra 90-degree turn, and these are 50 Newton meters plus an extra 90-degree turn, and this is 70 Newton meters plus a 180-degree turn. Okay, now that we've got this bolt, these 3 bolts, and these nuts all torqued down, now we can start trying to press the spindle back into the hub. So I just saturated the spindle and hub area with some PB Blaster. I'm going to use the 3/8 to 1/4 inch step down to separate the spindle. Essentially what you're doing is you're putting it in straight and then you're turning it 45 degrees so that the 2 of the edges of this square are actually separating the spindle. So I'm going to do that real quick. And then once it's in there, you can just take your wrench out and just let the fit sit in there. Put some more of this PV blaster in there. So at this point, we've got this end link over here removed. On the other side, we still have that end link removed, even though the new spring is in. Lower control arms are back on. Ball joint nuts are torqued. The only thing left here is to kind of press this thing in. Use a hydraulic floor jack. And now it's fully in, so while the suspension is compressed, we're going to replace this M14 bolt and the 18mm nut. You're going to want to knock that bit out of the back so that that pinches back on. Throw the bolt through. Okay, so now that we have that bolt in, put the nut on the other side, tighten that up. And the torque spec for that is 70 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. Now we can lower the suspension. Okay, next step. Now we've got this pinch bolt back in. We've got to reconnect the sway bar end link. So that's relatively simple. And the last step of the install on this side is to torque the top hat bolts, and these call for 60 Newton meters. So now that we've got the driver's side all torqued down, we're going to move on to the passenger side. I've already got the spring in from last night, the pinch bolt's in. It's tight, but it's not to spec. The lower control arm still needs to be tightened to spec. Same thing with the ball joints. But right now I'm going to put the sway bar end link back on and torque that to spec, and then we'll torque everything else to spec. I'm going to go ahead and torque the bolts down for the lower control arm, the pinch bolt, and then the 3 top hat bolts on the top. After that, we'll move on to the rear, so I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so we are actually going to start on the driver's side because it is slightly different than the passenger side. The back side has a leveling sensor back here, right here. A little bit better view of it right there. That must be removed. If it's not and you lower that lower control arm, it will break and your headlights won't auto level. All you've got to do is remove the auto leveling sensor for the headlights. That's 3 T20 Torx bits, and then the 1 bolt holding the lower control arm on, and then you just swing the lower control arm down. Keep in mind you do have to use a floor jack to keep tension on that, otherwise when you take that control arm bolt out, it will spring down, and it will be much harder to take that lower control arm bolt out if it's under tension. So I'm gonna try to do this in one take. We'll see how it goes. One of the T20s. Number 2. There's the 3rd one. Okay, so you want to put enough pressure on this so that when you take this out, it's still being supported, but you don't want to actually compress the spring itself. So now we can try to get this out, and first I'm going to hit this with some PB Blaster. Okay, now that PB Blaster's had a chance to penetrate, I'm going to put an 18mm on this nut, an 18mm on the head of this bolt. So now we've got that out. This is ready to come down. Now, keep in mind, again, make sure that you are well clear of this auto leveler. Slowly drop the hydraulic jack. So now you simply pull the spring out. So you can see the difference between the race spring and the lowering spring. Not too much difference in overall height, but this one's definitely stiffer. We'll take this top half, make sure you can see where it's been seated. Try to fit that in the same spot. So you've got that all ready to go. Come down here and okay, so similar to the fronts, there is a stop where the bottom of the spring should be nested, butted up against. Got to reattach that auto leveling sensor and then do the other side, and then I'm going to drop the car down and I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. So I'm just getting done with the spring replacement, putting the front wheel onto the vehicle, and I noticed that we're scraping. We've been rubbing somewhere in the suspension and we've got this huge gouge in the wheel. Obviously, I can't drive with this. You got exposed wire, just a huge gouge. I'm glad I found it now and not when I was driving. But this means I'm gonna have to get some new tires. So I gotta figure out what kind of tires I want. I'm gonna have to take my winter wheels, slap them on the car so I can get it home, and then get these mounted up next week. So I'll keep you posted when I figure out what tires I'm gonna get put on. And yeah, it's just one thing after another with the suspension.